So this morning I want to talk about vulnerability. And in Buddhism, vulnerability, although it may be seen in other contexts as a weakness, is seen as a profound strength. It's seen as a doorway to authenticity in our relationships, to connection, to compassion, and the willingness to be vulnerable, to expose our fears, our imperfections, our humanity, really requires a tremendous amount of courage. It requires mindfulness. It requires wisdom. It is not about passivity. It's not about resignation. It's about meeting life as it is without the armor of pretense or the walls of fear. Without the armor of pretense or the walls of fear. So this morning I want to explore how Buddhist teachings encourage us to embrace vulnerability as part of authenticity, to provide the space for others to meet us there with vulnerability, and transcend the limitations imposed by our fear of being really open and genuine. You know this, that in the Buddhist path, a central cause of suffering is clinging. We talked about that last week. But here we're going to focus on clinging to our ideas of who we are, to our possessions, to our relationships, and perhaps more importantly, to the illusion of control over our lives. So really in this context, if you think about it, vulnerability is a practice of letting go. To be vulnerable means to acknowledge the impermanence of our lives and the fact that we cannot control everything, and we're willing to open to all of that. It means dropping the masks that we wear to protect ourselves and allowing our true selves in all their complexity to be seen. Now this aligns with the Buddhist teaching of non-self, of anatta, which reminds us that the self that we cling to is a construct. It's a collection of impermanent experiences, beliefs, and emotions that are always in flux. That's what he meant by non-self. Not that we don't have a self, but it is something that is always in flux. And acknowledging this is pretty courageous because it really opens us up to, when we dare to be vulnerable, we have to dismantle this false self that we carry around and open to a deeper reality. In other words, vulnerability here is an act of surrender to what is. It requires that we transcend or set aside the demands of the ego, not in the sense of defeat, but in the sense of releasing the ego's grip and allowing life to flow from us naturally. You know, this fear of vulnerability for most of us arises from this deep-seated desire to protect ourselves from pain, from rejection, from judgment. Pain, rejection, and judgment. We're trying to fend that off. But Buddhism teaches that these fears are rooted in ignorance. You know, this belief that the separate self that we think we carry around must be defended. But in truth, as we always talk about, we're interconnected with all others, and the walls we build to protect ourselves only serve to isolate us from others. You know, we know that suffering, dukkha, is universal. To be human is to experience joy, sorrow, love, loss, and everything in between. When we recognize that we all share these experiences, we realize that vulnerability is not a burden to hide, but a bridge to connection. By facing our fear of vulnerability, we open ourselves to trust, to belonging, to empathy, and to deeper connection, which are the very qualities that dissolve this illusion of separateness. In Buddhist practice, compassion, karuna, is a central virtue. To be compassionate is to be willing to witness and hold the suffering of others without turning away. And I suggest to you this can only be done from a position, only can be really truly done from a position of vulnerability. When we allow ourselves to be open, we create a safe space for others to step into, to share their struggles and fears. This is a tremendous act of generosity as it communicates, you are not alone, I see you, I am here with you, I acknowledge you, and so forth. Creating space for others to be vulnerable, which also, by the way, requires mindfulness. to be present with another person's pain without trying to fix it or judge it. It teaches us vulnerability, to listen deeply, to respond with kindness. Now, we can't do this all the time, but we want to have access to it, to bring it to those appropriate moments when we're with someone where that becomes the container. In this way, our vulnerability becomes a source of healing, not only for ourselves, but those around us that we invite into that space. From a Buddhist perspective, trust, belonging, and empathy arise naturally when we position ourselves from a place of vulnerability, when we allow ourselves to be truly seen. So we experience the gift ourselves of being truly accepted. There is nothing more satisfying as a human being to be fully accepted when we're seen for who we are, warts and all. And what this does is really cultivate trust when we are willing to show up authentically, even when it feels uncomfortable, and it will be. Vulnerability is a very scary place to go because we feel so exposed and so raw. But belonging emerges when we recognize our shared humanity is more important than the differences that divide us sometimes. Empathy grows when we see our own struggles reflected in others and respond with an open heart. So our path encourages us to nurture these qualities through meditation, through mindfulness, through ethical living, through loving kindness, for example, which helps us cultivate goodwill toward others and ourselves. It helps to begin to break down the barriers of fear and judgment. Fear and judgment really cause us to put those walls up. Our ethical precepts remind us to act with honesty, integrity, and compassion. And this helps create an environment where we can be vulnerable, where we meet it with care and respect. So let's talk about a handful of the practices to help us become more vulnerable with those to whom we are close. Again, we just don't go out in the world this way. We do this selectively with wisdom and discernment, but we do it with the key relationships in our lives to deepen them and bring the greatest depth of connection. The first is to practice self-compassion. We start by being kind to ourselves. We acknowledge to ourselves our fears and imperfections without judgment. If I come to you judging all my own imperfections, I'm sure not going to be too eager to share them with you. So I try to drop the judgment of my own imperfections, and we remember that being vulnerable does not mean being perfect. It means being human. And next, of course, we cultivate mindfulness. We pay attention, we notice our thoughts and emotions, especially when we feel the urge to close off, especially when we feel the urge to protect ourselves or to throw up our walls. Mindfulness helps us stay present with that discomfort that vulnerability brings with it and to respond skillfully. Then, as I mentioned a little while ago, we practice loving kindness. We extend wishes of love and peace to ourselves and others, which this practice is a powerful way to soften our hearts and to reduce our fear of rejection or judgment. And we begin this process of vulnerability by being honest in small ways. We don't just put it all out there in one fell swoop. We share a little bit of who we really are, warts and all, with someone we trust. Over time, these small acts of openness where we just sort of put our toe in the water, build confidence, build deepen connection. When we just put a little bit of vulnerability out there and see how it's responded to, that becomes the encouragement to continue to take, to do it more in more depth. We hold space for others when someone shares their vulnerability with us. Many of us, when someone shares their vulnerability, we get uncomfortable. We sort of feel, how do I respond to this? So we work on listening without trying to fix or advise, without judging. We are simply present. We simply show up with our full presence, which is a powerful act of compassion. Ultimately, vulnerability is another path to freedom. When we dare to be vulnerable, we free ourselves from having the burden, the weight of maintaining that false self, that public self, that the ego wants to have make us look good. It is exhausting to carry that around and have to constantly bring it to the world. If we instead open our hearts to the beauty and fragility of life, we deepen our connection to others and to the world. As the Buddha taught, quote, "In separateness lies the world's great misery, in compassion lies the world's true strength." In separateness lies the world's great misery, in compassion lies the world's true strength. Vulnerability is not a limitation. To the contrary, it is a strength, a very hard won and difficult strength that allows us to live authentically, to love deeply, and to awaken to the interconnection of all things. By embracing vulnerability, we step into the path of trust, we step into the path of belonging, and we step into the path of empathy. We walk hand in hand with others toward the freedom that the Buddha promised. So those are some thoughts this morning on vulnerability.